Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about SSL, SQL Server SSL, which stands for Secure Socket Layer. And this is also known as SQL Server Encrypted Connections. When your company is asking you to provide encrypted connection between your SQL Server as well as the client application server, this lesson will come handy, and you have to have a prior knowledge and be very specific in order to configure the SSL properly. SSL, as I mentioned before, stands for Secure Socket Layer, and it's designed to encrypt data which is transferred between your SQL Server instance and client application within the network. This SSL also secure your data if there's any criminal activity going on against your network connection. What do I mean by that is assume you are trying to accessing your bank statement. So generally what you do is you go ahead using a network device such as a PC or a mobile phone, and you want to go ahead and access all the way to the backend database in order to see your latest transactions, see your, the account activities. So for you, in order to do this, before even if you go to the database server, you have to provide a username and a password. So the reason you have to provide a username and a password, so this server should authenticate you in order to make sure you are a legit user, and then it's the data which was requested is going to go and send it back to you. So now the companies, or let's say the bank concern at this time is, what if there is a bad guy sitting in there? Let me draw bad guy in here. So let's say this bad guy is sitting in here and he is accessing your data while this is being transferred between you and the database server. So what he can see actually the data is, if data is not encrypted, so he actually can see all these data, all of the data that's being sent to the database server and then retrieved from the database server. Let's say even he can see your username and password. So what's going to happen here is once you logged off, this guy is go ahead and he logs in as you and use your credentials and then try to damage to yourself as well as to your company. And he actually can go further and provide more damages to the company. So that's what the company's fear are. So they want to make sure your channel, your connection from your network device all the way to the backend database server is encrypted. So today what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to go ahead and show to you how to establish a secure connection between your application server right there and your database server right here. So this is your job, is you want to make sure you have a secure connection between these two devices. Okay, so for that purpose, what we're going to do in here is, let me bring up the SSMS right here. So I have some node in here. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to go ahead and provide you a certificate by creating a certificate with a PowerShell command. So generally what happens is, if you're working for an organization, your organization will provide you a certificate. So the network team will provide you a certificate, and you go ahead and do some configurations, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Then you're going to go put them in, configure that certificate within SQL Server Configuration Manager, and then from there, you're going to go ahead and do some other steps that I'm going to go in here and talk about them. So let's say we don't have that kind of luxury life. We don't have a certificate. We have to create one, a self-signed certificate. So we have to know this PowerShell command. So I'm going to show you how to create a self-signed certificate using this PowerShell command. Then I'm going to go ahead and show to you how to configure that certificate within Windows Certificate Store. I'm also going to talk about the type of Windows certificate stores that we are having. And then I'm going to go ahead and talk about SQL Server Configuration Manager, how to configure the certificate that you just created with this PowerShell command. And we're going to go ahead and export and import that certificate within a trusted root authorities. And then we're going to go ahead and check our connections, and there might be some details and I'm going to go ahead and talk about them while we are working on these steps. So first thing, let's go ahead and check our connection here. So if I run this SQL select a statement, so if I run this against this database server, so what I'm seeing in here is I'm seeing that my encrypt option in here is equal to false. So what that means is that I do not have a secure connection. I do not have all my data in here would be sent and received within a plain text. So if there is any eavesdropper around and they are accessing my data while the data is in transit, they actually can see the whole data. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and configure a secure connection in order for that bad guy, if he is accessing my data, he shouldn't be able to read it because those data that he is gaining all is gibberish. He cannot read them other than if he has access to the certificate and installed the certificate within his machine, then decrypt the data, which is likely impossible. So let's go ahead and start with our first item in here. Let me fire up PowerShell. So go ahead to the search bar in here, type PowerShell. And as soon as you see PowerShell, do not click on it because it will run not under administrative privilege. You want to run it under administrative privilege. So right click, run it as administrator. Click on yes. Okay. And here, what do I have in here is a good PowerShell, interface. So they are very simple. There is very simple, PowerShell script to create a self-signed certificate. So you starting with a new and then self-signed certificate. Yeah, okay, let me put self so it pops up. So once you put self, just press the tab, the rest of option will be filled up for you. And then you have to provide a very important parameter in here, which is a DNS name. If I put a DNS name in here, so let me create the certificate, then I'm going to come back and talk about these parameters a little bit. So let's say my DNS name will be SQL SSL. And then I'm going to go ahead and provide a location where I want to store this certificate within this machine. So I'm going to go provide a cert store location, type cert : / and press tab one time. So this says current user. So let me stop in here and introduce two other Windows certificate store for you in order to know the difference between them. Sometimes people are getting confused. So what's going to happen in here is if you go type on run, click run and go type cert lm.msc, that brings a certificate store for local machine. If I click on it, yes. So if you notice in here, it does say certificate local machine, so which means all certificates that you're creating for this local machine will be stored in here. If you're putting it into personal directory, it will be stored within this personal directory right there, and then you should have access to it. So what is this location does is anybody who has access to this machine, to this local machine, or within your domain account, or domain environment, and have access to the machine, they are able to have access to this certificate. Of course, you have to provide them the proper permission, and they can utilize the certificate for whatever the intended purposes is. If you want a certificate to be created only for the current user, at this time, if I want to create a certificate only for myself, I'm not going to dump it in here because the other users might have access to that certificate. In that case, I'm going to go ahead, let's say, go ahead again, type run, and this time under run, now, okay. Under run, type in here cert mgr. Let me see. So if you see in here, if you put them side by side, the cert mgr MEC is designed for local, for local user or current user. So this also has, look at the directories. This also has a personal directory. So this personal directory is designed for this current user who logged in. Let's say at this time if you log into your machine. So if I create a certificate and dump it in here, you will only be able to access that certificate. The rest of users who has account within this machine, they may not be able to access that certificate. Hopefully this is clear for you. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to go ahead and dump it within local machine. So everybody who has access to this computer should have access to that certificate. Okay. So let me go back to the PowerShell. Let me minimize these two. Okay. So as I mentioned, I am going to go ahead and put it in the local machine directory. So press tab one more time. So it changes it to local machine, and then put type in order to uh, store that certificate within the personal directory. And go ahead in here, provide them a friendly name. And you can say whatever name you like, SSL, SQL Connection. And the final step in here is to provide them a key spec. Okay, that was by a mistake. Uh, Let me provide a key spec. And the key spec parameter in here would be key exchange. Uh, Other than that, it probably may not work. So what I'm going to do in here is before I create the certificate, I want you to put extra attention to this DNS name right here. So at this time, my DNS name or C name is SQL SSL or SQL SSL. So let me press tab in here to create the certificate. So the certificate is created, and as you can see in here, my C name is SQL SSL. Okay, so I have it. Let me go ahead and fire up my local machine certificate store. Okay, so if I click in here and I click in here, as you can see, the certificate is created. So what I'm going to do in here is I have to do some configuration for this certificate. What I want to make sure this certificate is used for server authentication only. We don't want this certificate to be used for both client and server authentication. So for that purpose, I'm going to go ahead, right click, properties, and go ahead, enable only for the following purposes, and check client authorization, apply OK, and you should be good. So this is the pretty much the configuration you're supposed to do for this certificate. Now go ahead and fire up your SQL Server Configuration Manager. So I'm going to open SQL Server Configuration Manager. Yes. And in here, you have SQL Server services. Down here, you have SQL Server network configuration and protocols for MS SQL Server. Right click on that and then go to the properties. And here you have certificates. So under this option, I should have all the certificates that's created for this server. And there should be a list of them if I have more than one. So let me go ahead and find my certificate. Well, here's the problem. And most of you who is already a DBA and you are experiencing the same error, this is because your CNAME is not correct. And if you have received a certificate from your network team and they didn't provide enough attention to provide this right CNAME while they were creating the certificate, and you try to install that certificate or configure that certificate within SQL Server Configuration Manager, and you're not seeing it because you have a problem with the CNAME. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to go ahead and stop this session. It is well over 10 minutes. I'm going to come back with a session 2, and in there we're going to go ahead and talk about how to fix this, and we go from there. Okay, so see you on the next session.